Welcome to Getting Started with Einstein Next Best Action. This is covering the Spring 19 release general availability version. We're not going to talk about what Next Best Action is. If you want an introduction to the bigger picture of Next Best Action, the kinds of use cases it can be used for, the kinds of integrations that are available, you may want to check out this link, which is the Dreamforce session we did on it in September 2018. We're going to show you how to get started with Next Best Action and build this action strategy. Let's go over to our new org. This is a Spring 19 org, and it is a typical Spring 19 org. And what we're going to do, we're going to start with recommendations. Recommendations represent specific possible offers or actions that you might want to have the Next Best Action system make. We're going to start by defining some recommendations, and we're going to create a strategy, build it up, and show how it's used. Now, Next Best Action is available on every Spring 19 org. You don't need to get special permission. You don't need to request enablement, and you don't even need to spend any money. Every org comes with a freemium allocation of 5,000 Next Best Action requests per month. And that gives everyone a chance to try it out. It is a paid product, so if you go past 5,000, and you will if you start to use it seriously, then you are going to have to purchase either Service Cloud Einstein, which provides unlimited requests to Next Best Action, or packs of monthly requests for your org. Now, we're going to start out with recommendations, and the first thing we have to do is make them visible. If we look here, you'll see that there are no recommendations. And that's because when a Salesforce feature is released, its tab is off by default. So the very first thing that I generally do when I'm setting up a new org to run Next Best Action is I go into my profile, and I'm just going to use the System Administrator profile here, and I look for tab settings, and I find recommendations, and you can see that it's set to tab hidden. So let's change that to default on. And now we've got some recommendations. So let's create some recommendations. The first thing I'm going to do, if we go back to our finished product, the first thing we're going to do is create some general recommendations. These are sort of going to be our basic everyday recommendations. Now, if I double click on this in the strategy builder, you'll see that I'm loading all of the recommendations that have a category equal to general. Now, notice that I'm in the Next Best Action strategy builder. And one question you might have is just, how do I get to that? So let's take a look. Before we actually go and start creating recommendations, let's create an action strategy. You can find the Next Best Action functionality either by searching on Next Best Action. You can also find it by searching on Recommendation Strategy. We've got an alias set up for that. And so here we have some old strategies, and I can create a new one. And let's call this my demo strategy. Now, like a lot of Salesforce functionality, Next Best Action is designed so that strategies are connected to specific objects. And there are reasons for this that we're not going to go into in this presentation, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a case-oriented strategy. And now I've got my strategy. So back to the recommendations. We want to create a few general purpose recommendations, and I am going to show you what some look like right here. We've got a variety of Next Best Actions here, and now this is a general one here, tips and tricks to eliminate waste. So here are some of my recommendations from my org that has a ton of these. And if we look into this, for example, we can see that we need an increase yields, and it's going to be tips and tricks to increase yield. So let's go over and just create that right over here. And I'm going to upload an image. Now, acceptance label and rejection label refer to this button and the link right below it. And you can see that these can be customized. You don't actually have to display the negative response, bad suggestion here. But collecting that kind of rejection data is very useful later on when you're trying to train up predictive systems and analyze what people really think of these recommendations. So we suggested that you include them both. So let's make this accept offer and bad suggestion. Now, one of the most important things in a next best action recommendation is the action that should be taken when the acceptance is clicked on. So if we go back here, you'll see that when I click on this, it's going to launch a lightning flow. Now, pretend that this actually says something about payment instead of order refrigerant, and we're all going to get along just fine. So what I need to do is I need to have some flows, and they have to have two characteristics that are crucial. They have to be screen flows, and they have to be activated. If the flows meeting those conditions are going to show up in this list. All right, so we've got a recommendation. Let's create another one. And maybe this offer is send out some info on paperless business. And bad suggestion. And we're going to pick this. It isn't really the right flow, but you're just going to have to bear with all of this ragged demo behavior that you're being subjected to right now. Okay, we've got a couple of recommendations. Now, one of the things I'm going to also do, because this is a brand new list, we've just got recently viewed, I'm going to create a new list. I'm going to call it all recommendations. I'm going to make it something that everyone can see. I'm going to pin it using this cool new pin functionality. And I have all of my recommendations showing, and now because this is my custom solution, I can add create date and last modified date. All right, so this is great. And it looks like we have a few older recommendations that were here and weren't visible on that view. Okay, so if we go back here, you can see that we used category as a custom field. We set the value to general. The utility of creating custom fields like this to categorize your recommendations will make more sense as the strategy gets more complicated. So here it is again, category equals general. So the next thing we have to do is we have to start adding our first custom field to our recommendations. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to say edit object, and I am just going to create a plain old text field called category. And now I'm going to go back here and refresh this. I'm going to set the category value on both of these to general. Now we could load these recommendations into the strategy another way. We could load them by their name, say, or even by their description or their create date. I like using a category because names can change, names can shift, and you don't want your strategy being hard coupled to something that could change like a name. So I'm going to use this category field. All right, so now we have two valid recommendations. Let's go up and set up our first actual running strategy. So I'm going to drag a load recommendations element out onto the screen. I'm going to say load general recommendations, and I'm going to say, oh, you know what? And we don't see category, and that is unfortunately because, you may have guessed it, it hasn't picked up the change. So we're going to go back and a lot of little things like that that we hope to improve in the future, but weren't able to get to for our first version. So here, let's try this again. Load general recommendations. So the basic pattern that I'm following here is I load all of the possible recommendations, and then I use other elements to filter and sort. Okay, so now I've got this simple thing. So the idea is that these recommendations are going to get loaded. It's going to find two of them, and that's going to flow out to the output, and it's going to be called my demo strategy. So we've got this saved. So now let's go to a case page. You'll remember we set this to be keyed to case. So far, we haven't actually done anything in our strategy where that makes a difference. We will get to that soon enough. So let's go to our case record page, and I am going to go into App Builder. And you can see the Einstein next best action is here. It has to be on a record page to show up. It doesn't work currently on home pages. So I'm going to take next best action and I'm going to drag it over here. And I am going to set this to my demo strategy. And you can see instantly the correct thing is loaded up here. And we got something here. I don't know what these are. I'm going to get these out of the way. And I can change this to show up to 3 recommendations. I've only got 2 that are being loaded in right now. And I can bring in my Einstein header, which I want. And there's a couple other choices that you get here as well. So I'm going to save this. And now we're in business. And so I can click on one of these and it will run the flow. All right, so far so good. Let's do something a little more interesting. Let's create a late payment action. And again, I'm not bothering, just in the interest of time, to build out a lot of specific custom flows. I'm kind of just picking whatever happens to be here. So first, I'm going to set the category equal to late payment. And that's not that different. And you can see that it actually loaded it in here. It's very easy to reposition things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reposition that. And that means that we're going to load this, and they're both going to get grouped together and sent to the customer. But I neglected to set this to late payment, so I got to do this as well. All right, so we now have this in good shape. So let's take a look. Switch over to cases. Okay, and we've got our three are showing. So you can see how next best action will basically group together recommendations unless you tell it not to. Now in this case, however, we don't always want to show customers late, do we? We only want to show customers late if the customer's late. Now I'm going to simulate that by adding a custom field to the contact. we have added a payment status field to the contact record that I'm going to be testing with. And I have changed the payment status to current. So if the payment status is current, then we do not want the service agent seeing this collect late payment is past due on their system. So we need to filter this out in the event that the payment status is in good shape. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a branch selector, and I'm going to say allow only if delinquent, and I'm going to resort these like so. So now we've got the late payment, but it's going through a branch selector. What a branch selector does is it decides for every branch that's coming into it whether to let it through or not. You can think of it as having a little gate or a little door for every branch that's coming in. And you can have multiple branches coming in, but in this case we just have the one. And if we double click on this, you can see that you have the ability to express a condition for this branch. And unfortunately we didn't have time for Spring 19 to build a proper expression builder like Flow Builder has, so we have to do this the hard way for a few months longer. And so, but this is useful because it'll give me a chance to show you some key concepts here. So one of the concepts is that when you build expressions in Next Best Action, they use global variables, which are little placeholders that reflect information that is going to become available each time the strategy runs. So while we're in design mode right now, we don't know which contact and which case is going to be run at any given time this strategy is executed. So we create a placeholder. We say, when the strategy is run, take the record ID, grab that record, and then we are going to figure out what we want to do with that record. Now in this case, you'll remember we're based on case, so we are going to take the case's contact, and then we're going to get the payment status, and make sure that with custom fields you do include that. And we're going to basically say if this is not equal to current, and we need, because this is a string, we need to put those in as well. Okay, so we're loading this in, but it's only going to get through the gate if the case's contacts payment status is equal to current. So let's go back to our case, and one of the things I got to do here, I've got Lauren here, but I have to link this case to her because I think this case is linked to somebody else right now. So if we go here and we say, okay, Lauren is the contact. What did you see what happened right there? Instantly, as soon as the case changed to Lauren, that collect payment went away. And indeed, if we go back to Lauren and we say, oops, Lauren, you're behind in your payment, you can see it's back again. So it's refreshing in response to that information, which is pretty cool. You can see we've got the late payment here. We've got some general recommendations. Let's add a few. Let's add an external connection. So I've got a financing offer here, and you can see that this is basically category equals financing. And this is going to be a 0% offer. So if we go look at this, Let's go find our 0% offer. Here's our 0% financing. So we're going to offer this 0% financing only to people with high credit scores. And to get that information, we're going to have to call out from Salesforce. And let's go to my case and hit refresh and see what happened. And you can see the 0% shows up and the past due is showing up. I'm going to show you, there's another tool we've got here. Notice this test button. And you can see that there's this sort of shortcut version here that shows you all of the stuff. So you can test your stuff without even leaving the strategy builder. Now let me show you a couple of nice tricks. The first is you can see here that the order I have this in is 0%, then customers late, and then my general propositions. And notice that that maps to from top to bottom here. That's the sort of default sort pattern. And you can actually change this. So if I take the general recommendations and move them up like this and save and then run this test again, you can see that I've changed the order. And we can see that here as well if I do a refresh. So that's one tool you have to change the sort order. That's essentially changing the order of the branches coming into a node. You've got some other sorting tools that you can use. So for example, a very useful tool that I like to use is I like to add a custom field to recommendations. Let's go to a recommendation. Let's hit edit object. I like to add a ranking custom field, so I can just provide a recommendation with a useful number, numeric value, and that's a pretty simplistic way of looking at decisioning. It is certainly not a nice Einstein discovery predictive model, but it can be a very useful tool in your arsenal. So, for example, let's suppose that if we go back to our recommendation, we stop clicking around, if we go back to our recommendations, let's add this ranking field. So we've got ranking, we've got category, and let's give the late payment a rank of 10, and let's give the 0% offer a rank of 8, and then let's give the sort of general purpose ones ranking of 3. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sort into this mix. So let's call this sort on ranking. And let's take the ranking, and I can basically say how I want this. So I can say I want this descending. So even though I have my branches aligned like this, let's move this around. So this is going to override the order of things and allow you to sort on some fixed value or some other property. So we've got, just to show you that this is working, I'm going to put my general recommendations on top. And oh, you know what? Let's see. Let's put this here. Here you can see how flexible these strategies are. And let's take another look. Okay, so I've got late, 0%, and then the generals, even though the generals are on top, and that's because the sort is taking precedence. But what you may recall is that I have not delivered on my promise of pulling the credit score from an external connection. So let's do that. Let's deal with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my manager. I'm going to create a new connection. Now, what the new connections, when you connect something to next best action, you use an Apex action. It's easy to pick get credit data. Now we have to be careful about how we refer to this. So remember, the $ record is going to be a case because this is going to be on case pages. So a case ID is going to get passed in. So we need to go from the case to its contact and from the contact to its external ID. It's going to return. So we've got this connection here. This connection is going to return a credit score. And I'm going to use that credit score to filter this recommendation. I'm going to do that with another branch selector. Let's make this allow if credit is high. All right, so I'm going to double click on this. So if you'll recall, what we're doing is we're looking at the credit score that's coming back from that connection. That connection is going to be executed right before this strategy runs. So what we actually need to do is we need to grab the connection via its API name. So we are going to go here. We're going to say, well, what we want is the variable credit score insights, and then we're going to get its credit score, and we're going to say let's say that it's greater than 400. It's giving me a validation error. That doesn't work. So it's not coming through for some reason. So why is it not coming through? Well, let's add another. Let's go to the power debugging tool, the inspector. Okay, so I'm going to go into the inspector. I'm going to provide the ID. I have to make sure it's the ID of the case. And I run this. And look at this error. It tells me right here that the action, I forgot to put a remote site setting. So I created this new org. And whenever you do a call out, you need to have a remote site setting. So the good news is that's very easy to address. We will go here, say remote site settings, and I need to create one that points to this service. And this is, it says, pretend that it doesn't say repair service. Pretend that it says spanking new, made just for this demo credit score application. Okay, so we're in business with our remote site, so we're basically telling Salesforce it is okay for this Apex code to call out to this site. Okay, so the inspector will show you a picture, a trace of all of the information flowing through the strategy. At the moment, nothing is clicked on, nothing's selected, and it's actually showing me all of the different nodes, all 7 of the nodes that I have here. But it's easier to get a picture of what's happening if we go node by node. So let's start by clicking here. I'm clicking on collect load payment, and it basically says, okay, what recommendations flow through that node? And it basically tells you, well, collect late payment is the only output that loads from there. So we know that this is successfully loading one recommendation. We then click here and we can see that this is passing it through. So it's passing that through correctly. Now, if we go here and change this to false so that we close the gate, and then we save and run this, you can see that it's not allowing any outputs. It's blocking it. We're still and interestingly, because the gate is closed, the system doesn't even bother to load recommendations here. It's basically being efficient. It's saying, well, this gate isn't going to pass anything through anyways, so I'm not going to bother. And so if we go back here and set this gate to open again, then we get back to what we were. We're loading in collect payment, we're passing it through here. Now let's click on this one. We get to this one and we're actually getting 3 inputs now, but we're only passing 1 output. And if you'll remember, that's because we set the maximum recommendations to 1. If we crank this back to allow all recommendations and rerun this again, you can see that now all 3 of the inputs are flowing out of the outputs. And we get here to the end, and you actually can't click on the end. It'd be nice if you were able to, but you're not able to. Here is the output. Here is the output node. It has 4 coming in and 4 going out. And this is very useful. It shows you the order of things as well. And then you can try it out with a different case to see what that would be like. Let's quickly look at the other elements. The filter element lets you filter recommendations on recommendation properties. So you can, it looks a little like the branch selector, but whereas the branch selector is always about $record or maybe $user or $request. In other words, one of the pieces of context information that's passed in at a particular runtime. The filter focuses on the propositions, so it's going to be using, it's going to be talking about properties of the recommendation, like season equals spring, or category equals general. So it's just another way to filter things. Limit reoffers is pretty self-explanatory. It basically uses feedback. It looks at whether the user has already seen a recommendation within a given amount of time or a number of reactions, and will prevent the same recommendation from being offered too many times. Branch merge is sort of just a cleanup element. It doesn't really do much. It allows you to merge 2 branches together without any complications of additional filtering logic. And first non-empty branch is a specialty element that essentially allows you to put several branches into it, and whichever branch, resolving from top to bottom, whichever branch has results, that's the only one that's going to get through. So there is a basic introduction to Next Best Action, and I encourage you to get your hands on a Spring 19 release and start playing around with it. If you want to participate in the Next Best Action community, you can find that by going to the Salesforce Trailblazer community and searching for Next Best Action. You will have to then scroll down past this stuff and look for the groups section. You will find Next Best Action, which is now public and open and has official information. And as documentation becomes available, it will be provided there as well. So good luck, and we hope you enjoy the product that we've created.